thank you for having me. And I am very privileged to be here today to speak with you folks from all over Canada, doing a lot of great work in this realm and sharing my experience on the IOT case, so the injectable opioid agonist treatment case. IOT was a special case here in Alberta because it obviously addressed an issue that I'll get to that needed to be addressed, because there were a lot of folks who were at risk of facing serious harm if the Alberta government went through with its proposal to shut down IOT therapy in this province. But it also highlighted a broader issue in Alberta, which is the difficulties when it comes to advocating around harm reduction or policies that improve the lives of people who use drugs. And we are in a critical juncture in this province, and I think many have spoken to this, or your colleagues have spoken to you about this, that we have a provincial government who is bent on undoing all the progress that has been made over about a decade in terms of addressing these issues, and also at the most terrible time where this epidemic is just growing, and then the rates of overdose deaths are growing, and it seems disinterested in applying any expert evidence or approach to addressing this issue, and engaging in a punitive manner towards advocates and people on the ground, particularly people who use drugs, who try to organize, who try to take measures to address these issues. So just want to provide that context that this IOT case arose in. So injectable opioid agonist treatment, which I'm sure most folks are aware of, is, as the medical literature sets out, it's the only form of effective treatment, or the last form of effective treatment that's regulated in Canada for folks with the most severe form of opioid use disorder. That's what the literature says. And Alberta, in many respects, was a leader in this therapy, or this approach, up until the election of the UCP government. So when Jason Kenney came to power, his government started undoing a lot of the various measures put in place by the previous government to address the opioid overdose epidemic, including cutting the IOT program. But not only did this government try to undo the policies and frameworks for addressing this issue, but they engaged in a punitive and retributive approach towards any advocates, either in the healthcare profession, peer support workers, or people on the ground organizing with people who use drugs, and people who use drugs themselves, to silence any criticism of what they were doing and any opposition. So when the government moved to shut down IOT, it stated, made ridiculous assertions that this form of therapy was not required in the province, that everyone who was in the program itself did no longer need the program, that could transition to other forms of treatment, and that no one would be harmed by their actions. And in many respects, a lot of folks were unable or discouraged from speaking out. But there were some folks who had the courage to speak out and to organize, and many doctors came together, wrote an open letter. Folks tried to advocate internally within the various systems of healthcare in this province, all to no avail, unfortunately, because this decision came from the top, and there was an ideological approach or opposition to this form of this approach to harm reduction. And things escalated quite quickly, where people in the community, in the harm reduction community, people who use drugs, realized that if something was not done, we had this patient population of about 100 folks in Edmonton and Calgary who access the service, who would be cut off from the service and likely face immediate, serious, irreparable harms. So a couple of folks reached out to me, and I remember the first conversations we had were with a couple of folks who, again, had the courage to come forward, and in both cases risk kind of reputational harm, employment prospects, but they felt that this is something that they had to do. So we sat down, and we spent the first little bit talking about that fear, how the government of Alberta had really silenced folks. And we started building a plan for how we could bring this lawsuit. And at the outset, and this is important, maybe not for folks in the audience today, but for lawyers or organizers who are working with people who use drugs in these circumstances, that, the outset, the most important thing that you have to do, and we did, is that we spoke with drug users, spoke with members of the IO program, and figured out what we needed to do to make their lives better, to push back on their terms, to ensure that their stories are represented in any lawsuit. So I remember in Calgary, one of the folks who helped us out, who was a lead organizer within this particular lawsuit, took me down there, and I spent 5 or 6 days just going and meeting folks in the IO program in their circumstances, on their terms, and trying to understand their stories, but also what we can do to fight back, to use their lived experience, their hopes, their aspirations in this lawsuit, center the lawsuit around it. And I just got to say that I remember being down there and meeting with so many folks, and I would meet them in the morning and then go to my go away, write affidavits, write out their stories, and go back in the evening to sign it with them. And there was a palpable fear, a real palpable fear, if what the government was proposing to do took effect. And it was really gut-wrenching, actually, because for many of them, they had been in the program for a year or two, and their lives had changed dramatically, right? They were doing things they never thought possible because of the program. And with the proposal, it was all being taken away from them. In Edmonton, we didn't have the same direct assistance to meet with IO patients, but we had enough support that I was able to set up, for days at a time outside of the IO clinic, and people would know that if they wanted to participate in the lawsuit, they'd come and speak to me outside. And we managed to marshal 11 or 12 different plaintiffs, about 10% of the IO patient population in Alberta, to fight back. So our approach was to really center the lawsuit around their lived experiences and to weave the law into it. So that was the core part of the lawsuit, really providing unvarnished experiences and perspectives and views of people who use drugs, people in the IO program, front and center for courts to contend with. Because it was a theory of mine that if courts saw the experiences, the harms, the hopes, the aspirations, the concerns of the government's approach, it would compel them to act. And in this case, find their conduct to breach the charter rights that need to provide these services. The second thing that we did is we buttressed the personal experiences with expert evidence. And the expert evidence was provided by a lot of folks in Alberta, but outside of Alberta. But those in Alberta, I just want to conclude on this, had real fears, and a type of fear that I don't think has existed in this province before, at least in the harm reduction realm, until this government took power. And we're talking academics, doctors, peer support workers, healthcare professionals who knew that if they did something, put their name on any piece of paper, any affidavit, they could lose their jobs. And, and I respect that. And some folks who were unable to come forward provided kind of institutional and background supports to ensure that we were provide the most sound evidence, the most cutting edge evidence. And some people, a couple of doctors in Edmonton and Calgary, put their names forward in affidavits. One public health worker worked for the Alberta Health Care Board, or Alberta Health, who set up IOT. After she retired, she came forward and provided us all this evidence about what the government was doing, why it was doing it, and why it would lead to the loss of life. So that was very, I think, reassuring to the folks in the IO program, but also to our efforts with this lawsuit. So we kind of used those two sets of kind of evidence together to really provide what we thought was a comprehensive, detailed narrative that the Alberta government wasn't able to challenge. To be clear, we didn't win in court. We didn't win the injunction application that we brought, but the public, and everything we did, we litigated in the public, being very clear, providing the expert and the patient affidavits to the public to read, to understand, engaging in the media as much and often as we can to really slam this government for its short-sighted approach to these issues. And in the end, it was that public pressure tied with the legal work that ended up winning, where this government backed down, provided what we were seeking for at the outset, which was that the program will continue for those existing in the program, that IOT will continue to be, that these folks will continue to access IOT. And there is other lawsuits to expand services, to other patients who need IO therapy. But it was a really remarkable thing, and it did two things. I think it really was a shot in the arm for many who work in the harm reduction sphere in Alberta, and many people who use drugs that, for at least a year or two with this government, had lost hope that we could organize, push back, and do anything of that sort. So, just in conclusion, the success of IOT is because a community came together in Alberta to push back against this government. And I think because we centered our lawsuits, our legal arguments, our public engagement around the lives of people who use drugs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avnish, for all of the tireless work and advocacy that you've done in the face of what we can honestly, openly say is just a really horrible government happening right now in Alberta. I will go on record saying that.